Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Walk Nation. And Walk Nation is hosted by me, Nabat, and Noor. And today's subject is going to be about boundaries. So we're going to have a little conversation about boundaries. What are they? What are they? How do you manage it? And our general experiences with having boundaries and learning about boundaries.
Right.
Um,
Hi, everybody. And also boundaries as they relate, specifically coming from, um, tribal societies or clan-based societies in
yeah,
the Somali context, and how to have. So yeah, today's conversation is just a brief chat about why they're important, assert why it's important to assert your boundaries or to even have them, what they are, and how they've benefited us. So take it away, Navid.
yeah, and the first hot take of the day is that in order to have boundaries, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have to be a free person. Like you have to be a free person and an individual who can make their own decisions because boundaries are something that you have to make for yourself. And it's not, people want to overcomplicate it, but when you're making boundaries, essentially you're asking yourself, what are the things I will allow and what are the things I won't allow? And sometimes people can, overcomplicate and think, well, how do I know what I allow, won't allow? Most of the time, it's just
Right.
listen to your body. Like if you feel, an aching sense in your heart, or if you're feeling like your stomach is sinking, usually that's a sign that something is wrong, that there have been some line that's been crossed that shouldn't have been crossed. And so when I say like you need to be a free person, this obviously contrasts with how you experience life in a collectivistic society, right?
Yeah.
Like in those settings, you're not free. You're like subject to the family. You're subject to honor culture. You're subject to shame culture. And so boundaries are
And
not
you're subject
something.
to the religion as well. Remember, like how many boundaries can you have if you're following rules, right? And the rules that are not exactly made by you. Um, yeah, but continue, Norbert.
Actually,
Sorry.
I would actually piggyback on that because that's exactly right. Rules you did not make. So what happens in this context is that you won't be able to make your own boundaries. People will make boundaries for you. So
Right.
it is that in reverse. So you're being told what you should allow and what you shouldn't allow, but it's not yourself who's determining it. It's somebody else. It's an authority. So it's like a perversion of boundaries because they're not your boundaries. It's more like a prison, right? Like if you don't
Right.
set the boundaries, it's a prison. Somebody has imprisoned you.
Correct.
And
Correct.
that is the
And
experience of growing up in collectivistic culture. Like as
as an
women,
individual, as
hmm?
an individual, as an individual, I was just going to add, as an individual, that caveat, because that's the issue. As an individual, there is no bound. Like, coming from a tribalistic or a feudalistic society, which most Islamic societies are, with the odd exception of that have some Middle Eastern states, like maybe Turkey and Iran is a little bit more modern, but then places like Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, extremely feudalistic, tribalistic societies where, um, you know, each individual is looked at as a reflection of the in group that they come from, whether that's, the clan or the larger tribe. So,
Or the
um,
category of people they're part of, right? Like for
right, right,
example, if you are of the category woman or girl, um, your boundaries would be much different than if you're in the other category of male.
absolutely.
Like a very good example of boundaries being set for you is like, being told as a girl that you have to wear the hijab, right? Like you
Mhm.
being literally told that you should not allow people to see your hair and see your body. So that is like
I'd
a,
actually take it a step further. I'd actually take it a step further and say that it's your entire beauty, or what is seen as what I would call self-expression, but in Islam is seen as a woman's beauty, um, that's how it's referred to in Islamic texts, is supposed to be hidden, and there is some sort of semblance of punishment, if you like, if you are a woman who has the audacity to self-express outside of the predetermined, um, I guess, rule set for you. So, I mean, in some ways, I was going to say that is a boundary that is definitely being set for you. In that, the boundary is you're not allowed to be seen,
exactly.
right? The boundary is you're not allowed to be seen by, especially by any male. I actually have a story, an example of this, Nabat,
Yes.
which was probably going to make you um, annoy you a little bit, but I remember one time I went to this African event. It was actually held in downtown Melbourne, and it wasn't an African event. It was some type of Islamic, I don't know. It was some type of multicultural, diversity, one of these events. And I just happened to be at the event, and I attended it alone. And I remember seeing a bunch of Somalis that I known and grown up with. And so it was great. And instantly I sort of went over there and I was, chatting with the girls. And there was a few guys that I knew, people that you know from around the way, like from Duxie. And I said hello to them. And I remember one of the guys, we were talking about something, to do with, I don't know. Anyways, we were in a small chat talk. And another Somali guy came out of nowhere. And then he's like, hey, Noon, and then he reached over to shake my hand, right? And he attempted to shake my hand. Another Somali guy ran out of nowhere and smacked his hand out of midair. And it was, I found it really embarrassing in the moment, because this is a really public event in the downtown city. It was not by any means a Somali only event. There was all types of people there. And this guy was causing a scene. He's like, what's wrong with you? Why would you try to shake her hand? And he made this huge big commotion. And I felt so in the moment, I got so angry at the guy that smacked the other guy's hand. And I said, who are you? How dare you? In Somali, we're all going back and forth, yelling at each other. It's basically Mogadishu 1993 right there. And we're going back and forth. But I just thought in the moment, how infantilizing, how insulting, of you to come out of nowhere. And this other Farah was much more religious. And I known all of them, okay? But the Farah that came out and smacked the other guy's hand was really religious. And he was projecting his own morality and his own sense of right and wrong onto me and to this guy. It was really embarrassing. But, this type of thing is, I guess when we talk about, this is why we did this episode, and we talk about these things so meticulously and at this kind of really rudimentary level, especially for people that are never Muslims that might happen to catch WAP Nation and be thinking, why are they talking about boundaries? It's so elementary, why? But coming from the culture that we do come from, as you can see, grown adults are quite literally infantilized, by strangers. So the point is these topics are really, really important. These are, something as simple as the boundary, does a stranger have the right to tell me to wear hijab or not? It might seem to a never Muslim, that's a ridiculous, nonsensical question. It should be no or whatever. But to somebody that's grown up into this sort of system of indoctrination, it's a foreign concept. The individual that's grown up within Islam, ex-Muslim or Muslim, their belief is the public does have some right to comment on, their behavior, right or wrong. Anything else you want to add on that, Nabat?
Actually, there was this. Oh, I'm gonna refer to TikTok so many times, but there was this TikTok, right? And there was this African American woman, and she was basically saying, Muslim women cannot catch a break. They could do a little dance tutorial on TikTok, and in the comments, men and women will be like, "Astaghfirullah, sister, go back to Islam." They're doing this.
The whole people,
the whole ummah will be in the comments, and
and
it's so widespread that even now, the non-Muslims are catching up. This African American who, in the clip TikTok itself, right? She wrote, "Don't cancel me," because she knows it's gonna be hot take. But the fact that she could see the patterns that has always been obvious to us is, I don't know. I found this just so funny.
I find it vindicating. This is exactly why WAP Nation exists, because quite literally, this is exactly the type of harassment that inspired me to come up with, platform. But this is exactly it. We women that come from this Islamic world, we quite literally cannot catch a break. I've said this before, and this is absolutely no exaggeration. It's kind of like being a celebrity, but except there's no deals, there's no fancy, there's none of the shiny and fun part of celebrity. It's quite literally like being known and people monitoring your life, all the horrible aspects of celebrity, when they monitor their lives, they pick them apart, they judge them harshly, there's nothing they can do right, that sort of thing. That's what it feels like to be a Muslim girl that's grown up in the diaspora. like, and it might be different. It is really different. I have to say that it is different for people that come directly from the Islamic world. The only people that come from the Islamic world have, more power to those people. Can we just say for a moment? Like I always, in my mind, I'm pouring out a lot of liquor for you guys because I know to live in the Islamic world it's a life sentence. So we get that. But to be a diaspora Muslim girl, the policing that we get is because there is this existential anxiety, underlying anxiety that is unspoken, but they do not want us, I'm talking about, so especially women from the Islamic world that are raised in the diaspora, to mix and meld with Westerners. I think that's what it comes down to. It's unspoken, but I think they go out of their way to make our lives so difficult, and police and monitor and belittle us, attack us, make us live in fear, because the fear is that we'll assimilate into the West. And the reality is women, I think, in general, assimilate better into all societies. We know that. So there is this kind of existential angst that all Muslim families in the diaspora feel, and that angst is therefore just like.
Yeah, Noon, you just muted yourself. Now, going back to the overextending that you were talking about, Noon. I used to be like, back in the day, I used to basically see, the overextending, the giving of yourself more than anything else, the going above and beyond for people who are not giving you the same in return. I saw it as a virtue, and it is a virtue. But the problem is, I'm no saint. Like, I was expecting something in return that I never got. So what happened was, I tried to pretend to be, and this is the community, right? It's asking us to overextend. I was trying to pretend to be something I wasn't. Like, I was trying to give of people who never gave me in return. And the thing is, that was a form of self-betrayal. Like, we've made it into a virtue, but that is a form of self-betrayal.
I have examples that you and I have literally done of exactly this with Somali ex-Muslims.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, isn't that exactly? And I say this for anybody that any ex-Muslims that are still isolated, that haven't met any other ex-Muslims. In many ways, I don't think you really need I don't think you need a community of ex-Muslims or anything to help you with your apostasy journey. I think you should be right on your own. But depending on your age, you may be more or less impressionable, or so whatever. But I said all this to say, initially when I came out as Somali ex-Muslim, I didn't realize that there was like underground communities of people that used to talk and engage with each other. Honestly, I was quite excited at the thought and idea of non-Muslim Somalis from around the world. So I was eager to be friends with them and share my story and vice versa. Little did I know, and this is how me and Nabat met and became friends. Little did I know that it was one of the most, it's exactly what Nabat said. This concept of overextending yourself for people that taking it back to what Nabat said was saying before about overextending yourself. I think the culture in many ways sets you up to kind of be polite, maybe not polite, overly, I wouldn't say submissive, but there is a certain aspect. I think you're kind of groomed in a way to allow people to treat you poorly, in my opinion, that come from your background. We're groomed into people pleasing and socialized into giving more credit to people because they're from the same in-group. So for me, for example, being born in Australia, I was born in a multicultural society. My early years, getting tongue twisted. And my earliest years of my life were not surrounded by Somalis or Muslims, for that matter. It was just a mostly European, I guess Australians of European and Asian descent. So, I mean, I think my parents, like my mom, definitely socialized me when Somalis did start arriving after the war and stuff, like into giving them more credit than they deserved. Would you agree? Like that there's sort of there's like a programming, and I guess it comes from.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And for me, where it went left for me, after leaving Islam, actually prior to me coming out as ex-Muslim in 2017, I never actually dealt with Somalis outside of my family because even when I was a closeted ex-Muslim or whatever, I just kind of, I don't know, there's a guardedness.
That's actually true for me too. Like, well, the thing is, quote unquote, I did in the early days of my childhood, right? I did deal with Somalis, right? But the thing was, one of the great things that I did for myself is like, okay, I wasn't good at boundaries in general. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a Pisces. But one good thing that I did was, and it came from the bullying, right? Like I was bullied a lot. So one thing I did was like, I had to protect myself, emotionally and even physically from this community, right? So I, exited the community in a way, right? Like I
had the same thing, by the way. I had the exact same thing with the Somali community. They were extremely violent, they bullied me.
It wasn't even a choice.
Like, it wasn't even a choice. And you can't like, and I don't know if you had your cousins, if it was like within your family as well too.
People at Duxie, everybody.
My first, I remember my first interactions with the Somali community, and like having a visceral fear of them, because I could see my relatives and stuff like that just came out of war, how violent they were and how different they were to like just my demeanor. Like it being like, obviously being in Australia, I was so calm and docile, and then out of nowhere, these kind of people came out of nowhere with a real the mindset of in Islamic countries is completely different. Every physical violence is used, force is used at every turn. Parents hit their children, brothers hit their siblings, hit each other, uncles, so extended family members are also allowed to physical assault you. So it was quite shocking. I remember as a child having a visceral culture shock, and then at the same time subsequently being thrown in many ways to the wolves, and just I feel like a lot of people that come out of our cultures, whether they're conscious of or unconscious of it, they have a lot of trauma, that unresolved trauma that they're never going to resolve for whatever reason, and they've brought it to these countries. And
so obviously, as we said before, right, like it wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. And it's actually one of the things that at first I was criticized, right, by my parents, right? Like, how can you exit the community? Why aren't you talking to people? Why aren't you engaging with them more? But eventually it turned out to be a blessing, because a lot of the people that I was supposed to engage with are now in prison, charged with criminal activity and so forth. So it's a protective measure that protected me twice, right? Like it protected me.
And by the way, the same thing happens. The same in this. If I'm so lucky that I did not hang around with Somali women like in my age, the same like my peers, my Somali female peers. Because if I look at them now, they're all skin bleached from head to toe, like quite dramatically, and the kind of ideas they've picked up on them about themselves, and they're quite violent as well too. The women are quite violent as well, amongst each other. Like just Google, Somali women fighting. It is that common, and it comes out of that same culture, of the scarcity of resources, lack. You've got an eye for an eye. All of these ideas and concepts accumulate and turn an individual, or turn individuals to be quite distrusting of others, and at the same time quite lax with violence. So I'm really glad that I stayed away from it. But that being said, going back to what we were trying to say before, I made the mistake of reconnecting with Somalis under the guise of ex-Muslimness. Like, we're all ex-Muslim, I was like, okay, this is going to be a more, I thought it was going to be more of a scientific community, at least thought it was going to be an atheist.
I think we thought it would be something like we have right now, right? Like two equal people, sharing ideas,
right, friendship,
having values, right? Like the reason you allow these people to enter, deep into our hearts, right? It's because we were having the expectation that there will be, people who will be sharing our values, right? Like who we could connect with at every level, and who, for whom our boundaries were much wider. That was obviously a mistake.
Exactly. And this is why, I feel like this is a perfect illustration for our listeners of an example where boundaries are so important and necessary. And you might not even necessarily think about it, because these individuals so-called are present and they look just like you, or they're from similar backgrounds just like you. But no, boundaries are really important in every aspect of your life, because these individuals turned out to project a lot of their traumas onto, it was just like a free-for-all of the ex-Muslim community is extremely toxic on the inside, because there's a lot of individuals that have come from all different walks of life. Like, for example, I come from an extremely liberal Sufi Somali background. Like, in my family, they love to dance, they love music. Music and dancing is not allowed for majority of Muslims. I said all this to say, just to illustrate, there's some families that are literally, letterbox ladies, like the whole burqas, the whole setup. So anyway, so I think a lot of people, so the trauma is varying in the ex-Muslim community. You've got people that have been married off to their first cousin, and been beaten and God knows what else. You've got people that have been, because there's obviously a lot of refugees, there's a lot of trauma these individuals each individually carry. And I think part of coming from the Islamic world is the tribal societies. Nobody's an individual, right? So they have so I think a lot of ex-Muslims have not shed that mindset that we're not individual, like that we're not a collective, like we are all individuals, you know what I mean? Like we should be judged on, the content of our individual character and the merits of what we bring, rather than anything else. But just like with all things, hurt people hurt people. So a lot of these individuals in these ex-Muslim spaces, have a lot of trauma. That's unresolved, and they project it onto. So, for example, because I came from a very liberal Somali background, I was told by many Somalis that I have a privilege, and I was effectively, treated, there's even threads about me, you can easily Google, of Somalis talking ridiculous, like talking like A, they know me, B, just maligning my character, attacking me. I'm not a public figure. I'm just I guess now a YouTuber with Nabat.
Just a private person with
but we're private citizens, like there's no reason why I should be. It's not like I've ever applied for political office in Somalia, which would understandably come with a level of scrutiny from that said community. But I don't think I should be scrutinized for being an atheist. I don't think my mother's address should be from, given, like, shared amongst people in the UK and in Minnesota and so on. And a lot of that was obviously from Somali Muslims that were harassing me. But the reality is a lot of Somali ex-Muslims that are in the closet that have no intention of ever coming out, are quite toxic to and are quite vicious to those of us that are public. They think
especially
they project a lot of their jealousy onto us. Like, for whatever reason, they come from their backgrounds, and they blame us for not sharing that same experience and not sharing the same fears as well. Like a lot of people, for example,
and not sharing the same opinions, right? I think that's one of the core factors, right? Like I remember that, the very first episode we had on Rock Nation, right? We were getting dragged for opinions we didn't even have. So I think, throughout
were we getting dragged specifically? We weren't getting dragged on Twitter. We weren't getting dragged, but we were getting dragged by Somali ex-Muslims that felt that didn't have the courage themselves to speak publicly about anything. They couldn't put their name or face to anything for whatever reason. Might be valid, might be not. But the reality is they did not have. They did not.
Sorry.
Yeah. So for whatever reason, these individuals could not be public with their views, but at the same time felt that they had the right to police us on our platform. And we've told them, and I've said this ad nauseum on WAC Nation, we're individuals. WAC Nation is not a reflection of the East African community. We are East Africans, and, that, individuals. And I've said ad nauseum, I've been on other ex-Muslim platforms. I say, like, you don't like my platform, make your own. I'll support it if it's good content. Like, by all means, like there shouldn't be this kind of mindset where there can only be one. If you've got an objection to anything that we do, by all means, go ahead and make your own. And deal with critics and deal with all of that. But a lot of I don't even know where I've gone with this. This is a little bit of a long tangent.
No, no, it makes perfect sense, right? Like the thing is,
Yeah,
and it's very important to note because I think so. First of all, a lot of the people who are criticizing us, right? Like they were actually supposed to do the projects that we were doing, right? Like we came
right.
in, very early, in our ex-Muslim journey, did the things, right? And I think, and to be honest, this is gonna sound, conceited, but I think a lot of it was just jealousy, right? Like
Yeah,
absolute seething hate, the fact that we who are both, sort of marginalized, right? Like you're, what is it called?
in my own ways. Yeah.
You're a free woman, right? Like, liberal in every sense. I'm a queer man, right? So there was both a jealousy and also a hatred that, these two categories of people were the ones, quote unquote, leading the movement, right? And the mistake I think we made in the beginning was we gave people a sense of we were leading a movement, right? And so they were projecting a lot of responsibility onto us. And I think the boundary we have to make right now, and that has to be very clear, is that we're two individuals, we have opinions, and we're working together, and that's it.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I was going to say, I actually don't. Just to be generous to us, I actually don't think that we ever asserted that we were like the leaders or anything. I think we always had the intention. I think that was just projected onto us, and I think because I see criticisms of all ex-Muslims, like even people like that come from for apostate prophet. People do not understand. I'm talking about ex-Muslims that are closeted. Do not understand what it takes, the tenacity it takes, the courage it takes to be public with your views. I support every single public ex-Muslim that has their face up, and that is, making arguments against Islam, because it takes a lot. This is not this isn't
Recognize the courage.
we're effectively, yeah, no, not only we're effectively engaged in an ideological war. So it takes a certain type of person to even want to enter the fray, so like if you don't have that character, that's fine, you know what I mean. I like I wouldn't, I understand the perils of and the challenges of speaking out. But the reality is it has to be done. It has to be done. There are millions of people that rely on us. And when I say us, I'm talking about those of us who are privileged enough to live in the Western world. And, people might roll their eyes and say, is that much of a privilege? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We're coming from Somalia, coming from where we come from the poorest countries on earth where basic infrastructure doesn't exist. So the fact that we are living in, these countries, it is a great privilege. And that's why we do what we do. You know what I mean? Like I've had so many death threats. I've had so many, all types of threats, sent my way. But that does not negate that I'm extremely privileged Somali living in the free Western world. And I should use that privilege, which is the right to speak, free speech, right? And in the West, we have the arguments that are protected by our right to free speech are not the pretty arguments. Are not the feel good, community, the inclusive arguments. They are the arguments that cause friction. That's what's protected by our laws in the Western world. So we have to make these, like the arguments the things that we say out loud are things that would get you tortured and murdered in heinous ways in so many countries in the world. So we have to do it, because it's the right thing to do. And so I said all this to say, I encourage anybody that has any of that tenacity or like any of that character that I mentioned just before to join the fray, because like I said, it is an ideological war, and we really do need every single, last element, if we are, if going to even move the needle, which I would say we so far haven't. I'm just saying on the larger scale of ex-Muslims, not just Waqf Nation. But anyway, I think I'm going to wrap us up here. If there are any other comment that you want to make,
I just want to make two last comments
yeah, go ahead.
that people should take away from this episode about boundaries. The first is don't take criticism from people you wouldn't take advice from. So if somebody is criticizing you and you wouldn't listen to them, if you would not listen to their advice, don't take that criticism. And the second advice I have is no is a complete sentence. Like you don't need to, argue with people. Just say no.
I love that as well too. So simple, so quaint. And I think I'm going to wrap us up on that note. Thank you so much to all of our listeners for for once again joining us. Please subscribe and hit the notification button. I am aware that we are sometimes not as consistent with our content. So please hit the notification button so you're aware when we have upcoming content. Please stay tuned because we do have a lot coming your way. We're slowly going through a range of issues, and next episode, join us because we will be tackling a big one, an even bigger one that we have so far. It will be about anti-Blackness, specifically racism, but specifically anti-Blackness, what it means, what it looks like, who's guilty of it in the modern world. Is it even real? We will delve into all of that next time. So, like I said, hit that notification button, and thank you so much for your time today.